Also thinking of situations like taking Adderall. It's not wouldn't be considered an enhancement for a child with ADHD to participate in school. However, when a person doesn't have ADHD and takes it for improved performance on exams or improved ability to stay awake and focus on homework, then it becomes an enhancement. So, there's a lot of gray areas in terms of what is an enhancement and what is not an enhancement. To see, is it something that to excel you need something more, to improve you need something more? So, you have to think of what is an enhancement. Enhancements can also provide a positional advantage. If everyone used steroids, there would be no benefit to using steroids. If every cyclist doped, then there would be no advantage to doping. Right now, only a small percentage of athletes take steroids. So that baseball player who takes steroids, or the track and field runner who's a shot putter who takes steroids, if they can gain more muscle mass than others and improve their performance, then they have what's called a positional advantage, which gives the beneficiary an asset in a competitive contest relative to others if they don't have the same advantage. If they all have the same advantage, then that positional advantage disappears. So, in competitive sports, even gaining a slight positional advantage over opponents can make a difference between a good performance and an average one. Even when competing against yourself in marathons, etc., people can go to great lengths to make small improvements. So, looking for that positional advantage. One of the things that can happen with, getting that positional advantage through things like taking steroids is called stacking. And stacking is taking several steroids together, and it carries with it very significant dangers. There have been several reported cases of bodybuilders who have taken large amounts of steroids and damaged their livers or their hearts or become violent. I'm not sure if you remember the case. I know I remember it from not too long ago, but in professional wrestling, there was roid rage is pretty common. You've heard a number of cases, but one in particular was Chris Benoit, who was a professional ranked wrestler who strangled his wife and suffocated his 7-year-old son, then hanged himself with a weight machine pulley. And later on it was reported to be an issue of steroids. Lyle Alzado was another one who played for 15 seasons for several professional football teams. He began taking steroids in 1969 when he was in college to become bigger and bigger, but he never stopped. There was a report that at the peak he was spending about $30,000 a year on steroids and human growth hormones, buying them all across the country. And he admitted that the steroids made him so crazy that he couldn't deal with his social stress. His second wife blamed the breakup of their marriage on the mood swings, similar to what was seen in Chris Benoit. And after many years of denying steroid use, and 3 months after being diagnosed with brain cancer, he finally confessed that it was mentally addicting and he didn't feel strong unless he was taking something. He had some radical chemotherapy done, got pneumonia. He died at the age of 43. So the official cause of death was a brain lymphoma, which is a rare form of cancer, but the use of steroids can't be medically proved to have caused his lymphoma, but he believed that that's what the cause was. Then the question becomes, should we just legalize these things? There's one bioethicist, Julian Sovolescu. You've got a couple of articles up by him that I posted on Plato that I've included as part of the PowerPoint. But he believes that rather than prohibiting the use of these banned substances in sports, we should legalize them because, in his opinion, the enormous rewards of winning that we have, coupled with the minimal consequences of cheating and the low chance of being caught, it makes doping simply irresistible. It's like that forbidden fruit that really isn't that difficult to get. So, if the drug use in elite sports is wrong because it violates the rules, he thinks that maybe we shouldn't change the rules to make it permissible. And that what he says is that not that doing so will not cause any more people to take any more drugs. It's that they're doing it, basically they're doing it already. So it'll just cause them from not being accused of cheating. It's a matter of, again, what is right and what is wrong, and what should be considered cheating and what is considered an enhancement. There are negative effects to the legalization as well. Only about 10% of football players use steroids, but if steroids were allowed, 90% of them would use them. With greater public exposure, a lot more problems would occur. We don't need another generation of Chris Benoits, and we don't need to be out on the highway with this roid rage because everybody's on steroids. You could see a ripple effect, like when medical marijuana was legalized in Colorado. There were vendors that sprang up everywhere overnight, including vending machines that dispense marijuana to people with prescriptions. You see strip malls that have the pawn shop, the loan store, and the marijuana store. And, would you see similar things with the ability to use steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs more easily? So, you have to weigh what is the cost and what would be the rationale. Another ethical issue with medical enhancement is authenticity. And that, go back to the Tess case. And was Tess, with this medication, was she a true version of herself? Was she an authentic version of herself? Or did the Prozac cause her to be inauthentic? And are other medications the same? The ethics of cheating is also an issue. Maybe most cyclists in the Tour de France dope. Does that make it ethical? Is it right because everybody else is doing it? I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from my parents growing up. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't make it's right. And, would making it legal, does that make it right? Even if one cyclist doesn't cheat, an honorable person still exists. Think of the fall of Lance Armstrong. He was a hero for so long, for living strong, beating cancer, and being able to win so many cycling contests, and yet his fall from grace when, despite years of claiming he wasn't doping, to ultimately find out that he was. So if the majority of the athletes don't cheat, then the sport is able to maintain a good, is good reputation, it's respectable. But when most athletes cheat, as it appears in things like the Tour de France, the entire sport is tarnished. The history of the Tour de France, doesn't explain why we should legalize enhancements, but explains what happens when a culture of cheating and self-medication can corrupt a sport, as it did in this case. It lost all credibility. It's starting to come back a little bit, but for a long period of time after Lance Armstrong and after the doping scandal, there was very little respect for the Tour de France. So, should we be banning these substances? Should we be legalizing it? The two sides of that coin. Another ethical issue is the role of physicians in enhancement. If athletes who are taking enhancements are considered to be cheaters, then the physicians providing these enhancements to athletes are also corrupt. And they're corrupting both medicine and sports. so that's an important thing to also think about. Would it be considered medical malpractice? Should Chris Benoit's doctor or wherever he got the steroids from, should they be equally guilty of murder as he was? Obviously, suicide, so it's not something he was charged with. So are they equally guilty of the crime that he committed by the act of providing him with that drug? And finally, people with disabilities. You know, people are born with a variety of things that can help them succeed in various aspects of life and be less successful in various aspects of life. You have different abilities and disabilities. You have different family structures. You have different socioeconomic status. And all of these things can contribute to a person's ability to meet society's expectation of success. We've talked about various people with disabilities throughout this course who have made decisions to either live or die, and in some cases those decisions were driven in part by a lack of good resources to help them live what they deem to be a good life. You know, in discussing the treatment of newborns who have various impairments, the prognosis was better than predicted, and, you know, leading to the disability advocates to suspect prejudice on the part of the physicians, and, you know, having genetic abortions. All of those things, you know, bring us to ask what's normal and who is the person or who are the people that define that. You know, normalcy, and I don't like the word normal, and typically you wouldn't hear me use the word normal. I do think it's appropriate for this particular course. When I teach pediatrics, I prefer to use the term typical and atypical versus normal and abnormal, because, you know, what is normal? And that's the case that we're talking about here. What is normal? And who defines what is normal? You know, at different points in history, height there was a different norm, what was considered normal or typical. Weight is another one. I know that in ancient times, heavier women were perceived to be more attractive because it was perceived to be a status of show of wealth. You know, so what is considered normal has changes throughout history. But historically and biologically, a body has limited, the physical body limits what a person can do, and medicine can find a way around these limitations. If we think about infertility, which we've talked about, was once considered, the people thought it was impossible to overcome that and to be able to have children, and yet advances in medicine allowed that to happen. So, you know, there are, in many places, there is pressure for men and women to approximate a cultural ideal of what is beautiful, what is strong, and there's a part of medicine that's been developed to cater to those desires. There are dermatologists and dentists and cosmetic surgeons and, you know, all of the above that can help a person look younger, feel younger, act younger. You know, but there have been others who have pushed back against this. You know, we have seen people who have resisted separating conjoined twins, choosing to raise them as they are rather than risk losing one of them. The people who have chosen to not want to treat deafness but embrace the culture of the deaf because they want to be sure, you know, not give the cochlear implants to children because they want to be sure that the children can participate in their families, that deafness is a culture. So, you know, it's interesting that, you know, in some cases they're taking something that's perceived to be bad by some and trying to turn it into something good.